feel I got. With no one with they care for me. Alone I go and okay I be. Dum da dum. Dum da dum. Dum da dum.
Best local bands can be heard right here. 90.3 KRNU Lincoln.
Up the floor to Trey McGowan. He'll lob it for his... Goodness! A one-hand hammer!
On 90.3 KRNU, it's Huskers Hoops Live.
You betcha! Jazz Shelley has a triple-double!
Now, here's your host, Jacob Schwantz.
Welcome back in, everybody. Huskers Hoops Live is back on the air right here on 90.3 KRNU and also the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. If you want to leave a comment in the chat, I'll try to get to as many as possible. It should be a really fun episode this week. We've got a bunch of really important games to kind of get into from this past week and weekend, and also I'll have a special guest joining me. So we'll be going over the past week's games. I'll also look at some of the upcoming games. I think there's some important ones on the schedule, not just for the men's team, but also the women's team coming up in just a bit in this season. But Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports and Hale Varsity, he'll be joining me in the back half of this week's show, talking that huge matchup in Lincoln on Sunday, Nebraska and Creighton. This matchup could very well put the Huskers inside the top 25 in next week's AP basketball polls, so you never know. And it was announced during the Cal State Fullerton game that it was going to be a red out. The game is already sold out. It's going to be rocking and rolling in PBA on Sunday. But Huskers Hoops Live back on the air. Thank you all for joining me this week once again. Some news in Nebraska basketball. The biggest headline has to be from last week that Nebraska men's basketball, they reach 7-0 to start a season for the first time in 30 seasons. It last happened in the 1992-93 season, I believe. So with this game coming up on Sunday against Creighton, they dropped to number 16 in the most recent AP poll. They lost on Thanksgiving to Colorado State. This could be the first time that Nebraska is ranked inside the top 25 since the 2018-2019 season, if Coach Hoiberg and the Huskers can beat Creighton on Sunday. It's going to be very interesting. The last time the Huskers were even ranked in the top 25 was on New Year's Eve of 2018, as the Huskers sat at number 24. They were kind of bouncing around for a few weeks at 24, 25, and then back to number 24 before finally dropping out. And that was the last time that Big Red had even seen themselves in the top 25. So Coach Hoiberg hasn't seen too much ranking success in the last few years. It's been about 5 seasons since the last ranking inside the top 25. So no doubt, I mean, it's already been a phenomenal start to this season, a historic start for not only just Coach Hoiberg at Nebraska, but for this Nebraska basketball program. For 30 seasons to have your best start, it's pretty impressive. And there's been a little bit of chatter, a little bit of talk about some of the competition that this Nebraska team has faced. But like they say, you can only play the teams in front of you on your schedule. So Nebraska's handled business. They've handled some tougher teams like Duquesne and Cal State Fullerton. And they also took care of business against some of the easier teams and looked completely dominant against all those teams. So we've seen teams get upset by smaller schools plenty of times, not only in the past, but even just this year. So good ups for Nebraska to avoid any of those mishaps. Let's get into some women's basketball in Nebraska. I want to focus on them a bit this week. They traveled to St. Petersburg, Florida during Thanksgiving week. Their first game of the week was a win against Lamar, 75-61 in St. Petersburg. This was a very nice response to a tough loss at home to Creighton in the prior game. Good to see Nebraska kind of go away from PBA and still get the job done. And the biggest reason for that, folks, Natalie Potts had a career-high 22 points. She had kind of the leading scoring day for 3 Huskers who were in double figures in that game against Lamar. That was good enough and started the week well enough for Natalie Potts to earn her second Freshman of the Week award in just 3 weeks of play this season. She has really kind of far exceeded the expectations of a freshman coming into this program. We've seen Alexis Markowski come in and have that sort of impact as a freshman in the front court, but to be able to come in, and I feel like I've just been repeating myself so far in the beginning of this season, to be able to come in and replace what Izzy Bourne did for this Nebraska team over the past 4 years or so is just really impressive. The way that Natalie Potts has come in and looked so calm and so cool under pressure. I mean, she's very efficient on offense. That's by far her greatest skill, and that's something that Izzy Bourne also had as one of her strengths. She didn't take a lot of shots that were outside of her comfort zone. You knew when she was taking a shot, it was a good shot offensively. And I think that's what Natalie Potts brings and what Nebraska really needs from Natalie Potts so far this season. Potts is shooting the highest field goal percentage in the entire Big Ten Conference right now, 73.8% from the field. That is just... that is a ridiculous shooting number. I'm just trying to think of how ridiculous that is. I mean, she's making over 7 out of 10 attempts every single time. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. She's shooting over 90% on 2-pointers this season. Defenses, they really just, I don't know if it's just a bad matchup for them or if she is just very smart on the court and is able to find her spot at a very effective rate. And you have to wonder, what could this mean for Nebraska's offense moving forward? Because they scored 75 points in this one against Lamar, and you have to think there's going to be some really tough games coming up on the schedule in the non-conference when the Big Ten schedules kind of gets underway. You have to think you need efficient players who can go away from home and still get the job done. And Natalie Potts, with a career high of 22 points in St. Petersburg, Florida, kind of shows you. I mean, it is against Lamar, but she is someone that Nebraska has really relied on offensively, and it doesn't seem like she's shying away from any of these moments. I mean, she's been virtually one of the best offensive players for Nebraska in every single game. There really hasn't been a stinker for like a freshman kind of performance that you might expect at different points on the season. Still a long way to go this year, but if these first few games are anything to say about Natalie Potts, I think the Huskers might have a good one. But Nebraska went on a 21-3 second quarter run. These big runs are really going to get this team to go far if they can figure out a way to generate them going forward. 21-3 is kind of insane. I don't think we can expect to see that kind of a run in every single game. But if the Huskers can rattle off maybe a 10-2 or a 12-2 run pretty consistently, maybe once a game or twice a game, that's a great way to kind of build a lead or get back into these games. And luckily for this one against Lamar, the Huskers did it to kind of build a lead going away. But yeah, Lamar is not that big of a program compared to who the Huskers had up next this past weekend. But still good to see them building these habits early on, relying on defense, which I think is going to be something that Nebraska needs to continue to work through, because I think there's going to need to be some low-scoring games later on this season. Nebraska's going to go cold from the field. It just happens. We've seen it already this season with players like Jazz Shelley kind of not able to find themselves in some of these bigger games against Creighton. So it's going to happen at some point this season. And if the Huskers can still lock down on defense, kind of similar to what the men's team's done over the last year or so, that's a really good way to still at least compete in games that usually, if you're performing poorly on offense, you would have no shot even competing for. But Jaz Shelley against Lamar, she had a season high 17 points in that one. So again, really good response from her tough performance against Creighton the game prior. She was 2 from 11 from the field, 1 for 8 from 3-point range in that game against the Blue Jays. So hopefully this trip down to Florida has kind of rejuvenated Jaz Shelley, as there's some big games coming up on the schedule. So the Huskers are going to need her A game. Nebraska plays 3-2 Florida Atlantic tomorrow. That's not going to be a gimme. They've got Georgia Tech on, I believe, Saturday this weekend. 5-1 record for Georgia Tech this season. That's a pretty good team. They got Michigan State on December 9th. That's in East Lansing. They've got Kansas on December 20th. So just under a month away from that one. That one's in Lawrence. So Nebraska's got to get this offense kind of in a rhythm, get it consistent. Can't just be Natalie Potts putting the ball through the rim at a consistent rate. So we'll see if they can get that going, because Nebraska's going to need Jaz Shelley and some of these other players to, like I said, be on their A game. You have to be able to go to these tough environments like East Lansing and at Kansas and still be able to compete offensively. And I think if Shelley can kind of continue what she had in this Lamar game, I think the Huskers will have a chance. Moving on to TCU. Folks, this was a rough one. 88-81 loss, and the Huskers got down really big in the second half. They ended up bringing it back just a bit. They were able to knock off 17 points of a 21-point deficit in the second half, but in the end, it wasn't enough. And I wish I had the clip from my discussion with Drake Keeler on the first episode of this season for Huskers Hoops Live, because we were talking about it. We were talking about how TCU is a team that has really improved this offseason. They are now 7-0 after this win over Big Red, and they had only 8 wins all of last year. They had an 8-23 record in the 2022-23 season. But man, new TCU head coach Mark Campbell has completely turned this program around in the Big 12, because the Huskers were riding high off that win against Lamar, kind of responding, bouncing back from that loss at home to Creighton, and then TCU just smacks them right back down. It was a 22-9 second quarter in favor of TCU. That's really where this game kind of got away from Nebraska. A 13-point deficit in one quarter is never what you're trying to put out there on the floor. And this is kind of exactly what I'm talking about when I was talking about Natalie Potts and her consistency on the court, because Nebraska is going to need this efficiency all season long, or these quarters where they go 22-9 in a deficit, they are going to look even worse, because if even she starts to fall off, that's Nebraska's best player efficiency-wise. And the Huskers, they are going to be in some trouble. Jaz Shelley in this game against TCU, 17 points on 17 shots. Markowski had 14 points on 16 shots. So just overall, not a very efficient day from the Huskers' top players. And I like that they're shooting this much. I don't like when Shelley and Markowski start to shy away from the offensive load and start to just play super passive. That's not the way to go if the Huskers want to win these big games. But, I mean, they just have proven that some of these tough outings, efficiency-wise, are going to happen. And you kind of just have to figure out a way to live with it. And that's, I think these games are where Nebraska is going to need to lock down defensively and figure out a way to generate maybe some easier looks at the rim. They give up 88 points to TCU. They score 81. That's pretty good, but they give up 88 points. That is not the defensive effort that is going to be helpful going down the stretch, especially once the Huskers get in some of this Big Ten play with the Indianas, the Illinois, the Iowas, the Ohio States. It's going to be very tough to watch. So definitely some things to look out for going forward. But a 1-1 week for this women's basketball team, not the worst thing in the world. Still some things to work on, but still some hope to look forward to this season. Obviously, Natalie Potts kind of leading that charge for the hope of the season. We'll see how the Huskers can respond tomorrow night against Florida Atlantic, who, like I said, I don't think they're going to be a cakewalk. They're 3-2 on the season. We'll see kind of our thoughts on that game a little bit later on in the show. Got some comments here on YouTube. How do I feel about Markowski shooting so many threes against TCU? Never bad to take a few with an open look, but she makes her money on the block. I agree. I'm assuming she shot so many threes because TCU was leaving her open that much to take them. And sometimes it can be a little bit challenging. You would think, I've got this. I make these all the time in practice. I make them all the time in games. So why not take this shot? But some games the shot isn't there. And Markowski does make a lot of her points inside on the block because she's just such a difficult force to handle on the interior. She's got the height, she's got the strength, and she's pretty good at the rim. So definitely need to kind of focus more on that when the three-point shot isn't falling, because once you put a few in the basket, it might change your luck when you go from the perimeter, start to build some confidence back up, start to see the ball go through the net a little bit, because that's when Markowski's at her best, is when she works from inside out and is able to give you, 20, maybe 25 points on a good night and also still get you those 10, 12 rebounds on the interior. So definitely something to watch moving forward. We'll see if the Huskers can kind of figure out this offensive system in 2023. I'm going to step aside on Huskers Hoops Live. When we come back, we'll have some reactions to this week's game for the men's basketball team on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
Getting involved on campus, meeting new friends, and networking for the future can seem scary, but Scarlet Guard makes it easy for both graduate and undergraduates. Social events help students connect with others around campus, while the professional events help students network with alumni from around the globe. Possibilities within Scarlet Guard are endless, so join today. Go to huskeralum.org/Scarlet Guard or contact the Nebraska Alumni Association. Students today, alumni tomorrow, Huskers forever.
I'm Steve Clements, businessman and cyclist.
I'm Jeff Blymeister, Chief Deputy Sheriff and cyclist.
Riding on roads can be dangerous when motorists are not cautious. A year ago, I was hit by a car while biking in the county.
Cyclists have a legal right to use the road, and drivers must give them at least 3 feet of space. It's the law.
Cyclists should wear helmets, be highly visible, and use lights after dark.
We can share the road safely.
Learn more at lincoln.ne.gov.
Imagine what it would be like to live in a different country for a month, a couple months, or even a year. You may think,
I don't have money for that.
or,
It won't fit into my 4-year college plan.
but the Education Abroad office at UNL wants you to know an education abroad is possible for anyone. There are over 400 scholarships to help fund your trip and an advising staff ready to assist with all the planning. So set up your advising session today. Go to educationabroad.unl.edu. The world is waiting for you. Imagine never being able to drive, to watch TV, or even read Harry Potter. Reading is essential to our lives. City Impact Reading Center helps Lincoln Public Elementary Schools boost their students' reading scores by getting all students at or above their grade's reading level. Each week, volunteers of all ages go sit and read with students. You can help a student gain an important life skill and help change their future. If you're looking for some rewarding volunteer experiences, please visit their website at cityimpact.org.
Back live on Huskers Hoops Live, right here on 90.3 KRNU and on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me this morning, Tuesday morning, 8 to 9, every single week of the basketball season. As now I'll be starting to break down some of these men's basketball games from this past week. In about 10 minutes or so, Jacob Padilla will be joining me on the show. He'll be calling in. Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports and Hale Varsity. He's been covering Creighton this season, obviously with the big game this weekend, Nebraska and Creighton, potential ranking on the line. And I think actually something that might be kind of slept on is what this win could do for Creighton, because they are the ranked team in this matchup, but this is a 7-0 Nebraska team that is on the cusp of reaching that top 25 ranking. So if Creighton can pull it off, I don't know if they improve in the rankings with this win over Nebraska, but it definitely won't hurt their standings in the rankings, to say the least. But let's get into some of these games from last week. Nebraska and Duquesne. The Huskers picked up another W. That was number 6 on the season before their 7th came a couple days ago against Cal State Fullerton. But this one came against Duquesne, 89-79. And the big story in this one, Juwan Gary had a career-high 20 points. And Nebraska really needed his help offensively, especially in the second half, is because Nebraska went into the halftime locker room, believe it or not, down by 2 in this game, a 39-37 score heading into the half. Gary had 9 of his 20 points in a 13-0 second half scoring run. Come on, folks. The runs just keep on coming. It's really becoming a pattern this season, and I just love to see it. I feel like this Nebraska team is built to go on these runs, to bring themselves back into a game or extend a lead when they have it. In this case, it was able to kind of take a lead from being from behind and kind of secure some of the domination in the second half, and that's where the Huskers really took over this game. And Keisei Tominaga ended up leading Nebraska in scoring with 23 points. Really nice to see him kind of back to form from the end of last year. Obviously, he struggled in his first outing of the regular season as he was coming back from that ankle injury in the exhibition. But really, since then, he has pretty much been on target for the most part. I mean, he wasn't the biggest factor in the Oregon State game up in Sioux Falls, where the Sioux Falls Skyforce of the G League play, but that was a day that Nebraska really just couldn't miss whoever was shooting. It was a virtual complete domination from about 5 minutes onward. It was close for about 5 minutes or maybe 6, and then the Huskers pretty much led the entire way. And someone like Bryce Williams goes for 25. So it wasn't really a huge deal that Tominaga wasn't phenomenal. He was good. He wasn't great. But that's all that was really necessary in that one. So good to see Keisei kind of starting to break out of his shell in the 2023 season. Nebraska, the fans were really getting heated about Day Grant for Duquesne. And just real quick, it was great to finally see some attendance inside PBA for that Duquesne game. I feel like some of these early non-conference matchups, the attendance was, I don't want to say poor, but for the hype that was built on this year's Nebraska team, there was not the attendance to match that. You think of other sports in Lincoln, you've got Husker women's volleyball selling out every single game. You've got Husker football selling out every single game. So I'm hoping that now that the Huskers are still undefeated, still having a great season, I think especially for this Creighton game, it is going to be so packed and loud inside PBA. It's going to be so fun to experience. So good on the fans finally starting to show up. I believe, after football season's over, that's kind of when these fans will start to show up for every single game, men's and women's basketball, regardless. So really fun to see all the people come out for this one. And they were getting heated about all the flopping from Day Grant. The student section, they were just chanting flopper over and over again. And it wasn't without merit. I think Day Grant, there were a couple times that he was trying to draw contact and got the foul call, and that's a great way to get a student section heated. And he did just that. There were a couple times where he did legitimately get fouled, which was kind of funny when he would get smacked on the arm or get hit down low, and the fans would still be chanting out flopper. That was a great moment. He led the Dukes in scoring He had 24 points, and he was one of 4 scorers in double figures for the Dukes on that night. And talking with Ray Goss from Duquesne, their voice on the radio, he really praised what Day Grant does for that Duquesne basketball team. And he really generated a lot of offense. He had some great passing in this game as well. And it was definitely Nebraska's best challenge of the season to that point. They actually got out-rebounded 37-29, which was, I believe, the first time in the season that Nebraska even got out-rebounded. It's been a phenomenal start to the year on the glass, as under Coach Hoiberg, this team really has struggled to keep up on rebounds pretty much since Hoiberg has gotten here. So really good to see that this year Nebraska is up inside the top 5 in that category per game. I think that's going to be huge down the stretch in the Big Ten. And that's something that, the rebounding margin is something that kind of continued to be a storyline in the next game against Fullerton that I'll get into in a moment. But the Huskers had 5 scorers in double figures against Duquesne, the 2 20-point scorers with Casey and Jawan. But a lot of this had to do with the free throw shooting. Nebraska was near perfect from the charity stripe in that game, 28 for 31 from the free throw line. So that was another thing. I thought it was so funny because all of the student section were just clamoring on about all of these flops and just not good foul calls, to put it that way, for Duquesne and Day Grant getting all of these calls that he didn't deserve. But Nebraska had 31 free throws. So Nebraska actually ended up on the receiving end of a lot more whistles than Duquesne. And I just think back to last year in East Lansing when the Huskers were like barely 50% or worse. I think they were 8 for 20 or something from the free throw line in that game against Sparty. So that game, it just bores a hole in my brain from watching last year on the road when Nebraska was near full strength. They still had Bandamel making plays for them. So I'm hoping that this kind of perfection, if you want to call it that, from the free throw line continues as we move down in the schedule. Ramel Lloyd, he was available for the first time of his career. So he didn't play in this game or the Fullerton game this weekend. I thought that was one that he could maybe see an opportunity to potentially make his Husker debut. But that did not end up being the case, as both the Fullerton and the Duquesne game kind of just were a little bit too close to maybe work in somebody like Ramel Lloyd, who has yet to play in a legit college basketball game. So I'm going to step aside on Huskers Hoops Live, and we'll break down the Fullerton game in a bit on the show, but I want to bring in Jacob Padilla on the show in just a bit here on KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
The risk of an American man developing cancer in his lifetime is a little less than 1 in 2. The risk of an American woman developing cancer in her lifetime is a little more than 1 in 3. But the death rates of cancer have been declining in men and women since the early 1990s.
I relay for the support of my sister.
I relay for the support of my grandfather.
I relay for the support of my uncle.
Keep helping those in need by participating in Relay for Life. Join us for Relay for Life at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln each year to fight back against cancer. Sign up for your community event or donate at relayforlife.org.
If you're experiencing anxiety, depression, grief, or are even just homesick, try talking to a friendly professional at CAPS, your university's counseling and psychological service. They offer individual and group services to any registered student at UNL. International students, that means you too. Just call your University Health Center on City Campus anytime Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The services are easy and confidential, and the best part is the first 3 sessions are free. Go online at health.unl.edu/CAPS.
Back live on Huskers Hoops Live, and we have our special guest joining me on the show. Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports and also Hail Varsity joining me to talk some Nebraska and Creighton. Jacob, how you doing this morning?
Doing well. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it should be a fun kind of discussion today. Obviously, the biggest game of the season by far coming up for Nebraska. So Creighton comes into this weekend's game in Lincoln, I think, still as the favorite, but how much do you think they should actually be favored by as they kind of drop down to this newly ranked number 15 team in the country?
Looking at KenPom right now, they have Creighton as a 1-point favorite, factoring in the Nebraska home court advantage. So, should be a good game. Like you said, Nebraska they've taken care of business mostly against not very good teams so far. Duquesne is probably one of the best teams they've played this. I think Duquesne is actually the best team they've played thus far by a considerable margin. So, and they pulled out a 10-point win in that one. So, yeah, this will be a step up in competition for Nebraska, but the Huskers look to be a pretty well-rounded team right now.
And the Blue Jays took their first loss of the season to Colorado State on Thanksgiving. That was kind of a crazy game, 69-48. How do you think they'll be able to bounce back this week? They got a midweek matchup against Oklahoma State before coming into Lincoln.
Yeah, watching that game back, it was kind of bizarre, considering how good Creighton had been offensively, how well they had shot the ball in every game up to that point. And even games where they had struggled for a while hitting shots, they got hot and went on a couple of stretches there to just, against Iowa in particular and Texas Southern, teams where they weren't shooting the ball super well against, and then just buried them with an avalanche of threes and transition buckets at some point in the second half. So that never happened against Colorado State. No matter what they did, they just could not get the ball to go in the basket. And Mason Miller didn't play with an illness. I think he'll be back here for this Oklahoma State game most likely, and then Nebraska as well. And you kind of wonder, like, was he the only one sick, or were there some of the other guys going through some things, if that played into it? But it really was kind of wild to see. Like, they were just missing layups. They couldn't make anything. So I don't necessarily see that as something that's going to carry forward. I think that was kind of more of a one-off. Combination of Colorado State had a good game plan, and they executed it really well. And Creighton just, for whatever reason, they weren't totally locked in. There were a lot of mistakes they made, but they also just could not make anything from anywhere on the court. So, Creighton does get that road trip down to Oklahoma State here on Thursday to kind of get back on track. Oklahoma State, not a good team, but it also is Creighton's first true road contest. Obviously, down in Kansas City was essentially a home games, considering the amount of Creighton fans that were there for the 2 days. But yeah, I think they've got a chance to get back on track here, and I don't know that we'll see them shoot quite as poorly as they did against Colorado State again this season.
And I think somebody who kind of reflects this game perfectly to a T was Trey Alexander. I mean, he's been awesome nearly all season long, and he had a 1-for-16 showing against Colorado State. How do you think Nebraska will kind of be able to handle his scoring on the defensive side? Because he's a great scoring wing who has, I mean, I think it was against Iowa, he nearly had a triple-double. So he could do a ton of things offensively, and I think he's going to be a challenge for the Huskers.
Yeah, that was probably the kind of most bizarre thing of the Kansas City trip. Maybe he was one of the players dealing with an illness or something, but he just didn't have the same kind of pop that he had in the first 4 games. Shot the ball really poorly in both games. I mean, again, he got to the basket and just straight up missed the layup in the second half there. It was just nothing would go in for him. And 1-for-16 for a player as good as he is and as good as he's been this year, it was kind of wild to see. So that'll definitely be a key matchup for Nebraska. I think Jamarcus Lawrence, I'm assuming, will draw that matchup first. and we'll kind of see what they do once they go to the bench. But yeah, that'll be a key matchup there, and then Ryan Kalkbrenner. Those are kind of the two key guys. Although Baylor Shireman is leading the team in scoring right now after kind of the two rough games for Trey Alexander. That'll be a fun matchup with Bryce Williams, with the way that Bryce Williams has been playing recently. I think those two match up pretty well, actually, just in terms of the way they both play. But yeah, Alexander will be key for Creighton, getting him back on track, and for Nebraska, making sure that he doesn't get free lanes to the rim, making things physical on him, kind of collapsing on the passing lanes, or on the driving lanes rather, and making life tough for him.
I'm glad you bring up the Ryan Kalkbrenner matchup, because it's really going to be him against probably a combination, I would think, of Rinkmast, Josiah Alec, maybe Jawan Gary if some of those guys get in foul trouble, because I don't think Blaze Cade is going to be available for this game either. Do you think Nebraska has kind of enough beef up front to even be able to compete at that aspect in the front court against an all-conference player like Ryan Kalkbrenner?
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting matchup and how they choose to defend that. With the way that Nebraska's been playing defense, they're automatically doubling the post on almost every touch. They're flying around. That's going to be tough. I mean, they really loaded up against Kalkbrenner last year and dared Creighton to beat them from the outside, and Creighton couldn't. They school record 43s, didn't make very many of them. I don't know that that's going to work again, because that's essentially, it wasn't necessarily double every single touch, but teams have really tried to stay attached to Kalkbrenner in the pick and roll. They have sent a lot of doubles, or at least fake doubles, to keep him guessing. And I mean, going in like that is the key. A lot of teams think to slowing down Creighton. So we'll have to see kind of what they do there in terms of, all right, where are they double teaming from? How are they going to be able to kind of recover out of the doubles? Because asking Creighton just to miss open threes again probably won't work at the same rate that it did a year ago and it did against Colorado State. Kalkbrenner is still averaging 15 a game despite teams limiting his touches to a certain degree, shooting 63% from the field. So that is going to be the key, is taking away the easy ones to him. And then we'll have to see kind of how Nebraska recovers out of that and how Creighton chooses to attack Nebraska's double teaming and flying around.
Yeah, I kind of am concerned about that matchup in front a little bit more even than last year, because believe it or not, somehow Derek Walker was actually very good offensively against some of these giants up front. I remember he hit a ton of shots on Ryan Kalkbrenner in last year's matchup, and then against Purdue with a guy like Zach Edey, he was somehow, even only at around 6'8", 6'9", he was able to figure out a way to put the ball in the hole. But I think him and Rinkmast have a little bit of a different style offensively. Rink is much more of a straight post up, maybe turnaround hook, whereas Walker was able to kind of straight line drive right by some of these bigs and shoot on the move a little bit as he runs to the rim. I don't know if that's as much of a strength for Rinkmast. So do you think kind of that interior shot blocking ability for Ryan Kalkbrenner could be a little bit more impactful this year as opposed to last year?
Yeah, well, part of that, too, is Kalkbrenner was playing sick in the last one, and he clearly did not look like himself in that game. He's healthy now, unless he's gotten sick in the last few days. So that'll make a difference, I think. But also, yeah, Derek Walker was unbelievable with his use of angles and attacking the shoulder and finding ways to get shots up. And like you said, putting the ball on the deck and handling it, and making Kalkbrenner have to slide his feet, and that was one of the better games that Walker played last year. Mast is an interesting matchup there against Creighton's drop. We saw him; he's kind of been up and down from the 3-point line, right around 35% on the season, but it's kind of come and gone. this could be a game like the last one where he's going to find himself open for a few looks against Creighton's drop. And those are shots that he's going to have to hit to make them pay for it, because I do think he's going to struggle a little bit to score inside the arc to the same degree that he has against the smaller teams that Nebraska has played thus far. An interesting thing, too, though, is like if Mass does go at Kalkbrenner and Kalkbrenner forces some misses, will Creighton be able to keep guys like Juwan Gary and Josiah Alec off the offensive glass? Because we've seen that be a part of Nebraska's game thus far, where you're playing those guys are really good rebounders at the 4, and where guys attacking the basket has opened up opportunities for putbacks. So even if Mass doesn't score initially, if he puts some pressure and draws the shot blocker, it's hard for Kalkbrenner to go force a miss and then also turn and collect the rebound. So I think that offensive rebounding is going to be key in making sure that Juwan Gary and Josiah Alec can really punish Creighton on that backside with the way that they choose to play defense.
Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports and Hail Varsity joining me on Huskers Hoops Live this morning. And I definitely agree that the offensive glass could be huge, getting second chance opportunities against an offense as potent as Creighton. But something to definitely look at in this year's matchup, the Jays won't be bringing Nembhard or Arthur Kaluma into Lincoln, Kaluma transferring to Kansas State. How much of the Blue Jays kind of been feeling the loss of those two guys so far this year?
Yeah, kind of interesting. Like, so obviously they haven't had too much trouble scoring up until that last game. They're still kind of working Stephen Ashworth in. I think he's kind of feeling things out, kind of finding his spot on the team. And the start that Trey Alexander got off to, I think, was a response or kind of because of the increased role that he has had without Nembhard. It's given him a chance to play more on the ball, to really explore and expand his game. And through the first 4 games, he was one of the best guards in the country. So this last one is probably the first time that you really thought, it might have helped to have a guy that could put the ball on the deck and get to the basket more than they have right now. But in terms of Kaluma, I think the guys at the 4, while they haven't been putting up big numbers, they have been really effective in their roles, spacing the floor for Alexander and Baylor Shireman, and knocking down shots when the balls come to them. I think Mason Miller, Isaac Trout both shooting over 40%, and Francisco Farabello off the bench too is shot the ball really well this season. So they haven't necessarily missed those guys a ton just yet, but they also haven't been in many games where I think those guys would have made a big difference. Even with the way that Creighton played as a team, I don't think Nembhard would have changed that Colorado State result. That was kind of more just complete team playing poorly, but that is kind of the big question for this team. A little bit the athleticism, both getting to the rim and guarding on the perimeter. Those questions still have to be answered in terms of how are they going to handle that, and when shots aren't falling, how else are they going to be able to score? But I don't know that necessarily that the Colorado State game is the example of, that's it right there. I think it could have helped a little bit, but I think we still haven't necessarily seen a team truly test them in that regard, just because of the way that Colorado State game played out.
It should be interesting. I mean, all of these new faces for Nebraska, they haven't really had experience in this kind of Creighton versus Nebraska rivalry. And it's obviously a huge game for Nebraska, a chance to potentially pick up a win number 8 of the season. I also think a top 25 ranking. I saw they already got, I think it was 4 votes to be inside the top 25 this week. So how much would this win mean for Nebraska, but also for Creighton? Because like you said, they're coming off kind of maybe a once in a season type of game against Colorado State, but this is a pretty solid Nebraska team that I think probably later on down the season when we look back on it, if Creighton can pick up a win, I think it's going to be something that they might be able to hang their hat on a little bit more than we're thinking right now.
Yeah, Nebraska, I think they got one vote for 4 points. I think someone voted like 21st or 22nd or something like that. But yeah, it'll be Colorado State with their start to the season has really climbed up, and that's right now looking like the best team in their non-conference slate. But Nebraska is very comparable to Iowa at this point, and it's going to be on the road. So that's got a chance to be a really good win for Creighton if they can take care of business. And conversely, like we said, Creighton is the best team that Nebraska was seen by far to this point. Duquesne is right now they're 81 in KenPom, and that's the best team they played. So, and Creighton is 15. So this is a big game for both, especially coming off after last year. Creighton is going to want to get that kind of get them back for last season and make sure that doesn't happen again. And Creighton is hopefully fully healthy compared to last season and compared to even just last week, because I think this has a chance to be one of the better games that we've seen in this series in the last few years.
All right, Jacob, thank you for joining me on Huskers Hoops Live this morning. Should be a good one. I know you'll be at PBA covering that game. Where can everyone check out all your work this year?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at @JacobBadilla_ and check out herdatsports.com. We've got Husker coverage and Creighton coverage down. We got separate pages for everything there, in addition to kind of covering everything else locally with high school and some of the pro sports that are popping up here, like the Omaha Supernovas. We'll have coverage of that. Just go check out herdatsports.com for everything that we're doing in the Herdat Sports social channels.
Awesome, man. All right, well, thank you for calling in. I'll let you go and move on to the rest of your morning.
All right, thanks for having me.
All right, see ya. That was Jacob Badilla joining me on the show this morning. Always a great time talking with him, talking Creighton basketball this year. He was on the Nebraska beat last year for Hale Varsity, so he's got a lot of experience with both these teams, and he's definitely going to be putting out some good work this weekend and obviously the rest of the year as well. We're going to step aside on Huskers Hoops Live, and when we come back, I'll be breaking down that last game against Cal State Fullerton and kind of look around the league and see where both the men's and women's basketball teams are standing right here on KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
Exaggerating high school athletic achievements to your new college friends. Promising your new college friends that you'd a partial football scholarship to no-name state in Montana. What are these, you ask? These are the symptoms of someone with high school peaker syndrome, or HSPS. HSPS is a serious mental health condition that affects college students post-high school athletics. Thankfully, there is a cure to this crippling disease known as the UNL Men's Rugby Team. UNL Men's Rugby Team offers students the opportunity to relive those glory days. Tackle your HSPS head-on by visiting the rugby team's website at unlrugby.com.
For a little extra help settling in at college, look to UNL's first-year experience and transition programs. You can receive one-on-one student coaching and tutoring to get you through that tough course, or you can attend free workshops for information on stress, money, even jobs and internships. First-year experience and transition programs will assist you with academic support or general life skills to make your experience at UNL successful. Stop by First-Year Experience and Transition Programs located at 127 Love Library South.
Back live on Huskers Hoops Live, wrapping up week number 6 of the season here on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Just got off the phone with Jacob Padilla, and if you want to listen to that discussion before the Creighton game this weekend, we were talking Nebraska-Creighton. Good discussion there for about 15 minutes or so. You can go ahead and check it out on demand on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. You'll be able to watch all the episodes all the way through on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. But let's get into this Nebraska and Cal State Fullerton game. I was on the call for that game on KRNU. Me and Connor Clark were holding it down for everyone here in Lincoln. But this is the historic 7-0 start. The first time in 30 seasons that Nebraska has had this good of a start to a year. 85-72, your final score. Was the second game of the week with 5 double-figure scorers for Nebraska, led by Rink Mast with 19 points, 9 rebounds. No double-double for Rink in this one, but he really led the way offensively for what ended up being a great offensive performance. The Huskers have now scored 80 or more points in each of the last 4 games. This is consistency, folks. And if the offense is going to be this good, I think Nebraska is going to have a pretty good shot going forward, even as early as this Sunday with the Creighton Blue Jays. They're going to need the offense. I think we're in store for a very entertaining game. It's been a very rough season offensively in the Big Ten West for football, so a lot of Nebraska fans haven't seen a lot of points scored on the football field, but when it comes to basketball, I think Nebraska and Creighton is going to be a high-scoring, quick-paced game that's going to be just very fun to watch. A lot of high-octane offense flying down the court. Three-pointers are going to be flying. It's going to be electric, and it's a sold-out arena with a red-out. So student section is going to be packed. Creighton fans are going to be down there, so definitely going to need some of this offense from the Cal State Fullerton game. Nebraska gave up 30 points to Max Jones from Fullerton. He really couldn't even be stopped, even when he got a little bit banged up. I think he smacked his elbow on the hardwood a little bit. He went out for a few minutes, which was apparent on the scoreboard for the Titans because they kind of went on a little bit of a scoring drought at the same time as Nebraska. So that injury was key to this Fullerton game. But the Huskers benefited from it for sure during that stretch, because if Max Jones stayed out there, he could have probably gone for almost 40 in this game. And who knows what could have happened if the rest of the team got hot and kind of rode some of his momentum just a little bit more. But I don't think Nebraska wants to make a habit of giving up these big solo performances, because I don't think they'll be able to have a rough stretch against a team like they did in that scoring drought while also giving up major points to somebody on the other team. I think of this weekend's game with Creighton. You've got somebody like Trey Alexander or Baylor Shireman. Those are 2 guys specifically who can really go off like that. I don't want to snap my fingers and hurt everyone's ears, but both those guys can really get going in a hurry. They're like a microwave out on the floor offensively. And if Nebraska goes cold and those guys get hot, it's going to be lights out, and things are going to be looking rough in Lincoln. Let's move forward a little bit. There's about 5 minutes left on the show. I want to look around at some of the conference in basketball. Minnesota, they lost to San Francisco of the West Coast Conference on Sunday, 76-58. That's a major thing to look at here. The Huskers travel to Minnesota in just a couple of games, and the Gophers, they had some big-time performances from Pharrell Payne and Dawson Garcia, but they were the only 2 in double figures. And it seems like Nebraska should be able to go to Minnesota, take down the Gophers. They fall to 4-2 on the year with this loss to San Francisco. Their other one was to Missouri by 2 points. So as long as the Huskers kind of bring some of that defensive intensity that they've had earlier in the season, and Coach Hoiberg said that he wants to be able to bring that back that they've had earlier in the year and bring it kind of the rest of the way through the season. I think Nebraska should have a pretty good chance against the Gophers, even on the road. Another big game in men's basketball, Michigan State, they lost to Arizona on Thanksgiving, 74-68. That was a very fun game to watch. I was tuned into that one. Sparty, they now fall to 3-3 on the season. Losses to James Madison, Duke, and Arizona. That is a tough non-conference schedule for the Spartans. But it's important that they have to come up with these games and be able to put together some wins, because they've had a brutal non-conference schedule, but a lot of times these early games set the tone for the rest of the season, build your team's confidence, and help you work through some of your offensive struggles. And for having such a difficult non-conference schedule, they kind of start behind the 8 ball record-wise. And even if they start to bring the season back a little bit in the Big Ten Conference, the selection committee is going to look at some of these earlier matchups in the season and say, hey, you guys have finished strong, but you kind of struggled early in the year against these other good teams. So how high should we really rank you in the selection show or in the AP poll? So Michigan State kind of in a weird spot on the season. I'm not completely turned off of what their potential could be. They still have a lot of talent with Tyson Walker and Mady Sissoko, even somebody like Cohen Carr off the bench who was electric to watch. They've got a big game coming up as well against Nebraska on the schedule in Lincoln. So definitely keep an eye on Michigan State the next few weeks as they'll be coming to town in just a few games. In women's basketball, though, Penn State, they took a 1-point loss, only 1 point, to top 10 ranked USC, 71-70. The Trojans have, I think, my favorite player in women's basketball right now in Juju Watkins. She had 31 points in this game. I think she's probably the best player in the country right now. There's definitely some names to compete with, but she has just been electric in all of these big games. Ohio State, they really dismantled Oklahoma State on that same Wednesday of last week as the USC game. That was kind of a battle of the O-State schools, if you will, Oklahoma State and Ohio State. J.C. Sheldon, she had 22 points for the Buckeyes. Guys, she's going to the WNBA if she ends up wanting to go that way. She is a problem offensively. Indiana, they beat top 20 Tennessee team. Iowa beat Kansas State 77-70. That's kind of a rematch of the shocking upset for the Iowa Hawkeyes earlier in the year, where Caitlin Clark kind of frankly sucked in that game. She had 32 points in this one, so really nice response from her to that kind of a stinker that she had in the last outing against Kansas State. But keep it locked on KRNU all week long. We've got games coming up for women's basketball with Florida Atlantic and also Georgia Tech this weekend. The Huskers are back in town. Their next home game in men's basketball is against Creighton. We've been talking about it all show. I'll actually be on the call for the Florida Atlantic game on Big Ten Plus if you want to tune into that. And I'll also be on the call on KRNU for the Creighton men's basketball game. Should be a very entertaining week of basketball here in Nebraska. A lot of important games. The Huskers in men's and women's basketball still looking to establish themselves. A chance for Coach Hoiberg to start 8-0. There was so much hype coming into this year with his squad. I don't know if there was 8-0 hype from a majority of the media, but this is a huge opportunity that the Huskers need to pull off, in my opinion. I think this is a chance to change the program and become a ranked team for the first time since 2018. But that's going to do it here on the show for Huskers Hoops Live. Thanks for joining me this morning on 90.3 KRNU and also on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Make sure you check out the YouTube channel after this episode. Listen back to that Jacob Padilla discussion right before the Nebraska and Creighton matchup. I think it's going to be something to watch for sure. A lot of good points were made there. So with that being said, go Big Red.
Indie, alternative, and local music, 90.3 KRNU Lincoln.